I think it's safe to say you've never been to a laughing gas party. Apparently in the 1700s, it was a thing. Get together with your society folk and inhale laughing gas, and the rest is a party. I'm guessing you haven't done that. You're perhaps more familiar with laughing gas from this perspective, when you're at the dentist's office and you're having some procedure done, you didn't brush or floss properly, and now you have a cavity, and before something's done in your mouth, you get to take that deep breath of laughing gas so that you can then settle in and be calm. In the UK, the use of laughing gas, or I forget is it nitric oxide? That came too quickly. Nitrous oxide. The use of nitrous oxide has become perhaps the third most popular way of getting high in the UK. You see these cartridges here. They're from those whipped cream dispensers, the ones that add the whip to the cream. And unfortunately, what is laughing gas has ceased to be a laughing matter, in that this is one of the leading causes of death in young people in the UK, along with the public nuisance complaints that go with it. So sometimes laughing isn't necessarily a positive thing, isn't necessarily a happy thing. And that's the kind of laughter we heard about the first time that Sarah was laughing in this story. As she's listening in from the tent, this is quite a sophisticated tent here. It seems to be built out of wood beside the mighty oak. You see in this picture already, what we'll talk about in a moment, some confusion about what is the status of these people. They look like they're angels and one is glowing. Are they just regular people? Is God among them? That's part of the enticement of the story. But one of them says, you're going to have a kid. Sarah is going to get pregnant and bear you a child. And Sarah laughs from within the tent. And you can imagine the laughter isn't necessarily because she is happy or amused. There's probably a lot of emotion that's mixed up in that laughter. We'll come back to that in a moment. To really understand the gravity of this promise that is being made, that Sarah overhears, we have to realize that as Abraham and Sarah are traveling from their homeland to this uncertain land, they hear from God at various points along the way promises about Abraham's offspring. Compared to, in this first one, I will make of you a great nation so that you will be a blessing. You're going to be numbered just like a nation is numbered. It's a lot of people. But if that's not enough, later on God reiterates to Abraham, I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. And that's meant to mean something that's hard to count. Dust is everywhere. It is numerous. And perhaps the most poetic one, look toward heaven, God says, and count the stars, Abraham. If you are able to count them, so shall your descendants be. These are the promises that God has made to Abraham, that he is going to be the start of a people who are numerous and a blessing. Abraham he's already mighty in number. let's trace where he's traveled from, just so you can get caught up in this story. You'll see there in the part that's labeled Babylonia or Babylon. You're familiar with that term. They're at somewhere at the Euphrates where it gets more powerful. You have Abraham and Sarah journeying all the way past Assyria, up the Euphrates, to some point up north in the Hittite Empire, and then they head down to what we now understand as Israel, which was that land under Egyptian rule, part of the Egyptian Empire. That's the traveling that Abraham and Sarah have made. And along the way, these promises, they start to come true for Abraham, but not for Sarah. Abraham, having many wives, or a set of wives, has many offspring, and he's already the head of a large clan. It's hard to see here, but what you're seeing is the head of a long caravan, the caravan of Abraham. Let me zoom in there so you can get an even closer look. By the time we get to the story I read today, Abraham's clan is very numerous. He's a wealthy guy. He's an influential guy. You miss that when you hear the story. It just sounds like Abraham and Sarah are there in their pop tent out camping, and then a couple people come along and they're like, "Hey, come on and join us. We'll put something on the Coleman stove for you." No, this is a clan becoming a nation as it travels. And so when these strangers, these travelers, when they show up and Abraham notices them, again, what gets lost is the realization that it's not just three people, it's three leaders. They have their own caravan. They have their own people. And Abraham is in this moment where he's able to provide hospitality on a level that's capable of being an equal to these people. It's a proud moment for Abraham. And so he says, "Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree." He wants these people to stay, and he wants to offer hospitality. I mean, water, it's kind of scarce where they are, and he's showing that he's willing to offer a gift. Please stay. Take your shoes off and allow yourself to relax in my company. Here's where it gets really fun. The next thing it says, he turns and says to Sarah, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." 3 measures. The word measures is an English word for some Hebrew word that is pretty much equal to, I wish I could remember it. How many quarts are we talking here, Millie? Did we count up to 70 quarts when all is said and done? Yeah, 70 quarts of flour. Now, if you're like me, you're like, okay. But if you're like my wife and you know how to bake, you're like, what do you mean, 70 quarts of flour? How much bread are you making for 3 people? And that's where we realize behind the story, these 3 people, they have their own people. So that's a lot of cake. So Sarah, can you just whip up 3 measures of flour and knead it and bake it for these people? How long do you think that would take? Oh, yeah, all day. It's going to be at least 8 hours, if not more. That's important for the story. Abraham's providing hospitality for hours upon hours. Here's the next thing he says. Abraham took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to one of Abraham's servants, who hastened to prepare it. A living calf being slaughtered, and the other, I've never done this, but again, how long does it take anyone who's raised beef to take a live calf and prepare it and slaughter it before he can even get to roasting it? Again, it's all day. So what you want to catch in the story is that Abraham's feeding a clan. He's offering hospitality to their leaders and offering from his wealth gifts to their clan. And they sit and they visit for hours upon hours upon hours. Now, in our day and age, when anybody stays probably longer than 2.5 hours at your place, you're like, okay, when are you going home? But having a visitor, having company of strangers, people who can bring you news. Like, this is the internet in the olden days. Bring you news of what's going on in the world and exchange stories. That's what's happening. Long conversation going on. So get this. This is the only part of the conversation that gets recorded for our purposes in the story. The men say, "Where is your wife Sarah?" That's a polite thing to say, isn't it? Abraham must be. You got to remember, Abraham in his travels has already run into a few problems. That when he's entered into strange lands, he's been worried that leaders of other nations will want to appropriate his wife. And so it's a dangerous question. Why is Sarah back in the tent? There's a little bit of protection going on here. Where is your wife Sarah? In the tent, says Abraham. And then the men say, Sarah will have a son. Oh, pass me some more curds. Oh, by the way, your wife's going to have a son. No, you haven't met her. And Sarah, laughing from within the tent, I am old. My husband's old. How will I get pregnant? That's being recorded for us as the audience to the story. And then suddenly it switches from these men. If you noticed in the story, in the text, if you're following, the very first use of the word Lord that came out of Abraham's mouth was this small case L. And then suddenly became large case L to represent Yahweh. God then says, is anything too wonderful for God? Too wonderful. Sarah denies it. I didn't laugh. And God says, oh yes, you laughed. That's the part that, of all the things they said over those 8 hours, that the story wants us to hear. And just these three people, Abraham and Sarah, of all the people who are in the background that the story wants us to pay attention to, are highlighted for us. Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for I was afraid. Again, we think of laughter as always a positive thing, but there's a bit of a funny bone experience going on here for Sarah. To hear someone say, when you've been barren, when you've been trying to have a child and it won't happen, and now you're at an advanced age, to have someone just flippantly say, oh yeah, you're going to have a child. Can you hear it in Sarah's laughter? Can you hear the tone of her laughter, the feeling that she's not, it's, there's pain that's mixed in with that laughter. But laughs she does. And that gets to another part of the emotions in this story. She just laughed. She just got caught laughing at something a powerful man said. Just pause there for a moment. Some people in the room will get that intuitively. Some people need it explained to them. You don't laugh in the face of people who are full of themselves and have power. You do not laugh in the face of men who may think that they, in their arrogance, own you. To be caught laughing was suddenly a dangerous thing, for she was afraid. What will these people do to me if they think I'm mocking them? Will I be hurt? What have I just let loose by taking that one moment as a vulnerable woman and allowing myself some spontaneity of expressing what I'm actually thinking or feeling? She's afraid because she could be punished or hurt for this indiscretion of not keeping that wall up and sharing what she's actually feeling. God says, yes, you did laugh. And you just imagine Sarah's just waiting. I'm just waiting for it. Yes, you did laugh. Now you're calling me a liar. What'll happen next? And what happens next? There's no punishment. This is very important. This is a very important moment in the story. When Sarah laughs in the face of God, God doesn't respond with punishment. No, she doesn't. God responds with keeping the promise. God wants this to happen. God's got a stake in this. It seems, it's difficult even talking about this story, talking about Sarah being barren and attempting but unsuccessfully to have a child. Because when you're talking about, that there are people who are listening who feel that pain. And so when we hear the story, there's part of us saying, please God, a little discretion. But that's how God speaks to us. God speaks in ways that cut through all of our facade, right to the heart of what's going on with us. I know it's painful, but that's the God I think that we need, who can cut through it all and can pierce our armor and communicate directly with our heart. And so these promises that God speaks to Abraham are a way of saying to us that God speaks promises to us that pierce through our defenses and our heart. This is some of the most sacred moments in my life, in my career, have been those moments where somebody grants me the privilege of speaking past their defenses and conversing with their pain. That's where healing so often happens. That's what God does in speaking with us. And so when we think about ourselves as God's hands and feet in this world, we have to think of ourselves also as that piercing through the defenses of the world. That we live in a world that can be such a facade, so artificial at times. And as a church, it's our job to just speak past either the defenses or the offenses of this world and name God's love in places where there's hatred, or to name God's hope in places where there's despair, to name God's grace in places where there's disappointment and a sense of failure. How is God going to pierce through your defenses and your offenses? Are you going to make God work for it? That's the end of the sermon. This is set up for next week because the story goes on. And we're going to continue hearing about these promises. We're going to get next week to the story of Jacob, one that you just heard actually a few weeks ago. And we're going to see God's promise ongoing from generation to generation to generation. From Abraham, and now we've heard the story of Isaac, and then we're going to hear the story of Jacob, who becomes Israel. God piercing through the defenses of history, playing the slow game to get to us. So be ready for it. Amen.